I'd like to call this special board meeting to order, if I may. Member Harley, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. I am here. Member Johnston. Chair Kirby.
Here.
Member Leffler-Kemp.
Here.
Member Oswald.
Here.
Member Sandsted. Here. Member Welty.
Here.
Superintendent Gronseth.
Here.
Deputy Clerk Hassler.
Here.
Secretary Dolitz. Student representatives are excused. We have a quorum, Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody here to this special school board meeting. As you are aware, it was called by 3 board members under Minnesota statute, specifically to discuss Resolution B-617-3461, which stated it was passed on June 20th, I believe. Resolved that the district will commit to a multi-year alignment of compensatory education funds to stay at the schools sites where they're generated. Now, just a few words before. Because this is a special meeting, public comment is limited to issues on the agenda for this meeting. This is based on our policies, and board discussion likewise must fall within the posted purposes of this meeting. Certain policies apply to all of our meetings, and these are available to you. Speakers are expected to be concise, although that's not defined, and more specifically not to enter into debate or deliberations of the school board. The board may question people, delegates, for the purposes of clarification or information, but they are not expected to enter into debate with anybody. This is an open meeting. Board meetings are for elected officials to conduct their business, not necessarily for the public to engage in the deliberations of the board. Generally, we've allowed 3 minutes for presentations, but given the interest, enthusiasm, passion, I guess, of this issue, this can be lengthened a little bit. I suggest up to 10 minutes, although people certainly don't have to take that long if they don't want. After there has been public comment, the administration can give some updates on the issue under consideration, district commitment to the multi-year alignment, and the school board can then discuss this as well. Before we start, I'd like Member Oswald to read our civility statement.
The community vision and priorities for Duluth Public Schools. We build upon our shared beliefs and values of unity, high achievement, and responsible use of resources to create Duluth Public Schools and classrooms that are safe, supportive, and inclusive. We will work to inspire every student to achieve their potential and prepare students to lead productive, fulfilling lives as citizens of Duluth and the wider world. The 11 tools of civility. This school board recognizes 11 tools of civility, with an asterisk, that will provide increased opportunities for civil discourse in order to find positive resolutions to the issues that face our community. These tools include 1, pay attention, 2, listen, 3, be inclusive, 4, don't gossip, 5, show respect, 6, be agreeable, 7, apologize, 8, give constructive criticism, 9, take responsibility, 10, be honest and care for others, and 11, show your reasoning, show your evidence, share your reasoning.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda then is public comment.
If I could.
Member Welty?
Yes, thank you, Chair Kirby. In response to the directives you gave the audience and the board about how this meeting is to be conducted, you suggested a certain amount of flexibility, which I very much appreciate. I would like to point out that for several months, we have had a significant number of us on the school board who have been very interested in having the equity group from the Western schools come and talk to us. I've not yet managed to have a regular committee meeting in which that was possible. So I would hope that we could at some point have the people who have represented the equity group come and talk to us in a more informal setting, taking the places that our administrators frequently take, and I hope you would not object if we were to proceed it that way at some point, if it seemed to be in order to do so.
I'm unclear. Are you speaking tonight?
From the yes. Yes.
Our policy 8080 indicates that delegates are not expected to enter into debate or actual deliberations with the school board. So it would take a change in policy to do that, which would require unanimous vote of the school board to do so. I think that we will give the people who want to speak ample time to do that. You can ask them questions. For clarification or information, we'll follow policy that way.
Chair Kirby?
Yes.
If the policy says not expected to, that is not a prohibition.
My interpretation is they will not. There are 3 people that are signed up. Are there any more that wish to speak? Oh, Member Harlan. Sorry.
I wanted to speak to the piece about ensuring that people are able to speak there.
Sure.
One question is, will we ensure that folks are able to have to give their presentation following the public comment period, and then at that point in time, once they're done presenting, we can ask follow-up questions as needed within that discussion. I'm just looking for a little bit more concise so we can make sure folks are heard.
Right. I'm not sure whether it's more useful to ask them after their presentation. I mean, while they're at the conclusion of their individual presentations or at the very end, I'm open to either.
Chair Kirby?
Yes.
If I might add something to this. As I've indicated, 3 of us on the board have for a long time waited for an opportunity to have a dialogue, even though that's not necessarily prohibited or encouraged from our policies. I'll also make this point too. The school board will undergo a change, and we have had these families and representatives of Western Duluth for many months talking to us communicating through the documents they've put together about the issues of equity. And 2 of us who have managed to get this meeting set aside today will be gone. And there is no guarantee that a new school board will be any more open to hearing the concerns of the parents from Western Duluth once we step off the board. And I think this is an opportunity to have an open dialogue that Western Duluth would very much like us to have. And I'm a little worried that future boards might not be as receptive as this current board is. So with that appeal in mind, I will hope that Member Harlan's question and openness to having a dialogue with them after the opening comments would have a strong registration with you, and that we would proceed that way once that comment period is over.
I'm not sure whether Member Harlan meant ask questions or have a dialogue.
My understanding by statute is that the dialogue does need to happen with the board, but I think if there's sometimes the conversation, questions can provide more clarity, and so I think we could spend a lot of time dicing words back and forth, but ensuring that we are able to get the information that we need as a board and that they're able to share, I think is really important. So we could spend time dicing things, or we could begin moving forward and ensure that our community is heard in the process and that we don't need to fight along the way.
Thank you. I would like to proceed with the public comment then. First person is Henry Helgen.
There's an additional
welcome. That's on.
Hi, I'm Henry Helgen. I'm a parent of an East graduate and a current East student. I just wanted to use a little acronym for a term here to refer to schools where there's more than 50% of students on the free and reduced lunch program. I'd just like to call that an FRL school, and the other ones would be non-FRL. So we all agree that reducing disparities is important, but we also all agree that improving all students is important. There has to be a balance. I don't think there should be one exclusively at the expense of the other, exclusively. There must be some kind of balance and judgment by the administration. Another thing is we cannot compare a single funding source while ignoring the others. There's a whole broad range of funding sources that are used to improve student achievement. One of the things that the FRL schools, they have more funding and they have lower class sizes. We all agree that improving class sizes is important as well. I feel that a lot of the discussion about disparities has been unfairly blamed on the administration. There are many causes of disparities that are outside of school district funding. Housing, safe neighborhoods, parents that have to work 2 jobs, that they don't get health insurance or sick time, health care, transportation. These cannot be fixed by school funding alone. But one thing, so we must work with the city and the county and the state on those kinds of issues, take a holistic, broader approach to solving poverty in our schools and communities. One thing that school funds can fix is class size. This could mean the difference between somebody that merely graduates and somebody that's inspired through their life. All students should get what they need to improve. The goal is not to grade every student as a C, but to bring every student up a grade. I want to say that I agree with using technology to allow students to take classes at other schools. I think that's a reasonable approach if it's fiscally achievable. But I disagree with a suggestion that was made to have a 7th period only at Denfeld. Both schools, all schools, need this extra level, including the 0 hour, or the replacement would be a 7th period, and CITS courses shared amongst both. So I think a better approach to boosting enrollment is to do what we can to keep the most mobile people, the ones with the most resources that are most likely to leave, to keep them in our schools. So we do this by speaking positive facts and news while simultaneously addressing the needed improvements. Constant criticism of the schools could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Parents will believe this and they'll begin to leave. And the ones that would leave are the ones that are the most mobile, that have the most resources. So an approach that passes on all these FRL schools could cause the most mobile to leave. So I mentioned that 0 hour is important and CITS is important. I've spoken with this in the past. We can encourage additional courses and degrees by the teachers. I think that's all I have to say. So thank you. Please consider this when you discuss tonight.
Thank you. Next is Tammy Siebert. Welcome.
Good evening. I currently serve as the PTSA, Parent Teacher Student Association President at East High School. I have been trying to watch this issue a little bit for the last few months and trying to understand what exactly has been going on. a couple of months ago, I was made aware that there was not even a PTA at Denfeld High School, and I called some friends of mine, and I kind of got on them, and I said, hey, you have kids there. Why don't you have a PTA? What's going on? And so as I've been watching a lot of this, I've also had friends who had kids who went to Myers-Wilkins, and I remember one day her saying to me, it's amazing. They have so much money, they don't even know what to do with it all, so we're going to go to a big feed tonight, and they're going to do all of this stuff, and like for weeks and weeks. And this was a few years ago, and I kind of was thinking, well, that's really interesting, because another friend of mine is the PTA president over at Congdon, and they are working really hard to raise money for trying to do anything that their school is doing. So let's see, what is your title? School board, Oswald, whatever it is. As you said in what you read, you said it is up to you as our school board to use resources responsibly. And so as I look and see, there are hundreds of students living in poverty in the free and reduced lunch schools. Throughout our whole district, just because we have students at East who have a lower percentage of needing free and reduced lunches doesn't mean that those students don't still need help. So I know that East has about 234. Ordine East has over 200. Congdon has 125, and Lowell School has 166, but that's not many, and that's not really that many more. And because of that, they get $1,100 more per student in state money than Congdon Elementary does. The students who are not living in poverty that are attending Lowell benefit from that extra allotment, and the students who are living in poverty at Congdon do not. So I ask, how do we kind of make sure that as you're looking at this plan, how do you look at it to help all of the students within the district, everywhere? It's not about individual schools, I don't think. I also agree with the previous speaker that I think technology is an amazing thing, and we are raising digital natives, and there's no good reason that some of this funding could not go into be using kids who are at a school that would like to take a class and could do so digitally, taking that at another school in working that way. I think that's a great and creative solution. But I also think that it's important to look at the younger levels and figure out what are they needing so that as they are coming to high school, that they are wanting to strive and feeling confident that they can try new things and being willing to try things that may seem harder for them. So I would hope that that you would be wise with the resources that are coming, and that you would be an advocate for all schools, and also that you would look at why are some of the schools, why are people leaving and transferring to other school districts versus staying in the boundaries that they ought to be attending. I think that a lot of moral support could be used in changing our attitudes. I'm not originally born here, and I think that it's always been an interesting thing as people have said, oh, you're a cake eater, and I didn't even know what that meant for a long time. So I know there's a big past history of kind of this bashing of each other, and I think that that needs to end, and that it is up to all of us to help that. And I leave these thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Stacy DeRoche.
Thank you, school board members and Superintendent Grodenseth. My name is Stacy DeRoche, and I'm the current president of the Duluth Citywide PTSA, Parent Teacher Student Association Council. The PTA motto is every child, one voice. I'd like to speak tonight about every child. We've heard a lot about inequity affecting specific schools. We've labeled our schools as free lunch schools and non-free lunch schools, low-income schools, non-low-income schools, but schools aren't living in poverty. Students are. What I'd like to hear is a discussion about students. There are hundreds of low-income students in our non-low-income schools. Substantially less is spent on these students because of where they live. Geography dictates that their classes are bigger and they have less supports and after-school programs available to them. Are we comfortable with increasing class size and removing programs at their schools? If we change how funds are allocated, how do we ensure low-income students at all schools are supported no matter where they live? I'm also concerned that there hasn't been enough discussion of possible impacts on students, negative or positive. Moving money on principle instead of thoughtfulness is problematic. How much will class size increase and how will our teachers be affected? Will schools lose counselors? What programs will low-income students gain? What are the expected outcomes? Would moving money around lead to duplication of services or would it add value? To my understanding, we have hundreds of community partnerships and new initiatives already happening across the district. Additional monies from the general fund, grants, and initiatives like the full-service community school program have been funded specifically to support low-income students. Before making changes, can we have a conversation and a comprehensive presentation on what we are already doing? Shouldn't we do our due diligence to make sure any additional programs, changes to class sizes, or other initiatives would have a real and positive impact? This leads to a specific concern I have with how the reallocated money is going to be spent. There seems to be an emphasis on inequities at Denfeld. The discussion has been focused on providing supports to a specific group of students, those on the college track. My understanding is that Denfeld students choose their classes and they are not choosing advanced classes in enough numbers to justify additional class periods. Is using money to add advanced classes next year the answer? Or should we ask how can we better prepare incoming middle school students to feel ready and confident enough to eventually take AP courses? Wouldn't it make more sense to work towards AP classrooms full of students? 30 more middle school students who are prepared for a future AP class makes that class happen. Or maybe we should ask why Denfeld students are not signing up in enough numbers. Have we been respectful of the career tracks Denfeld students are choosing by opting in or out of certain classes? Are we asking how offering certain classes will affect the graduation or dropout rate? Former East Principal Knapp was a big supporter of some specialty classes at East. She said that students had told her that one particular class was the reason they came to school every day. It was the reason they were going to graduate. Have we asked our most vulnerable kids what will get them to school and what will keep them there? Is the reallocation of funds going to support those kids? Are we thinking about every child? Are we thinking about every child soon enough? So before the board decides to make changes, can we make sure the right questions have been asked and answered, that we've heard from those that will be impacted, that the money is spent in the right places, and most importantly, that the benefits outweigh the costs for every child?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Kevin Skura-Brown.
Good evening. So I really appreciate that we're having this conversation today, and I appreciate the board members who helped make this happen, and I appreciate the community that's arrived to talk about the various sort of dynamics in which this affects our community. These are important decisions. So I'm going to provide first sort of a five-part context that I think sort of gives the foundation for understanding the decisions that you're being asked to make. And then a very brief sort of framework that we believe, and again, my name is Kevin Skura-Brown. I'm with the Community-Based School Equity Initiative. That's who I'm representing tonight. And so then a really short sort of framework that while I know that's going to be hard to follow, would really provide sort of the clarity to the discussion question that you've really been asked in this resolution. So let me begin. So the first point is that Comp Ed, compensatory education, I'll be calling it Comp Ed. Comp Ed is meant to meet the needs of students who are underprepared and failing to make adequate progress. So let's all recognize and just acknowledge and accept that. It's clearly written in the Minnesota statute itself. The board vote on the 18th, as well as the superintendent's comments on the 5th, June 5th, have all affirmed that. Comp Ed funding is intended to meet the needs of students who are underprepared or failing to make adequate progress. Let's also be clear that I believe we would all agree that, as stated in the annual report by the school district, the existing achievement gap is unacceptable. And despite very concerted efforts to address it, our progress in closing that gap has been insufficient. We have an obligation to the entire community to do more. Now, I hope that no one will choose to argue either of those points. And so with that established, we can examine the current approach to allocating compensatory education dollars. So Comp Ed, achievement gap funding, is currently being used instead to meet a general education school need. A significant portion of Comp Ed is used to reduce class size and to reduce it uniformly across the district. General class size maintenance and reduction is a general education need. It is something the community values. We heard that already again tonight. It is something we need to pay attention to and we need to address. However, using achievement gap funding to meet this general education need at the expense of reducing the achievement gap is morally wrong. This is a justice issue. It's a fairness issue. We don't take from those with greater needs money that is targeted and meant to meet those needs and give it to others with far less significant needs. That is simply wrong. The board affirmed that in its June 18th vote, which brings us here today. Third, the current use of Comp Ed is stuck in equality thinking. There are two frameworks we can think about as we distribute resources. One is equality thinking and one is equity thinking. An equality model assumes some things and then does some things. It assumes that everyone is on a level playing field and it distributes everyone the same portion. That's equality thinking. It suggests that all of the students in a particular grade level have the same needs and therefore they should all have the same size classes, for instance. Equity thinking recognizes that people come with different needs and it applies resources to match the needs. That's what equity means. And we are asking for a significant shift, a philosophical shift in how the district thinks about its resources, to shifting to an equity model. Instead, the current sort of equality thinking assumes that all kids have the same level of need to individualized attention in comprehending course content, that all kids, regardless if they are above grade level, at grade level, below grade level, can have their needs met in a classroom of the same size. It also assumes that whether one student or 20 have IEPs or 504 plans, or are reading below grade level in a particular classroom, that it has no impact on the teacher's ability to provide the individualized support to each student while also providing the general instruction to the class as a whole. That's what equality thinking fundamentally says. And I would ask, does anyone really believe this? Would our trained and experienced teaching staff attest to this? Do our standardized test scores, our student grades, our graduation rates support that this is working? The question that you need to answer is reducing the class size for classrooms with no students or even one student who qualifies for Comp Ed support a best practice for addressing the achievement gap? It's a wonderful thing to do for general education. But is it a best practice for addressing the achievement gap? Remember, Comp Ed is specific funding that's to address the achievement gap. if we can't answer that as yes, then we need to bring that diversion of those funds to an end and make them available for their intended purpose. So number 4. I'd like to respond to the concerns about unintended consequences. We have heard that changing the way comp ed is allocated will have unintended consequences. We heard it again tonight. Well, it's important for us to recognize that the current distribution has consequences, many of which are indeed unintended, namely the persistence of the achievement gap. I am certain that is not an intended consequence, and I absolutely believe it is a consequence of the current distribution of comp ed money. Our decisions reflect our values and our priorities. On June 5th, the superintendent told us that after class size needs were met, then we could use additional comp ed money to address equity needs. We are here today because enough board members were clear enough that the status quo of diverting comp ed to meet general ed needs was wrong to force a vote. The vote was unanimous. Hopefully, because everyone recognizes that this diversion is wrong, and not simply because voting against equity makes for bad headlines. Number 5, so what would an equity approach to the use of comp ed look like? It would be targeted. Comp ed would be reserved for students who qualify as underprepared or failing to make adequate progress. For instance, CITS and AP courses should not and would not benefit, I think they currently do, benefit from comp ed funding, under an assumption that students in such courses do not represent students who are underprepared or failing to make adequate progress. And yet the current model reduces class size in our advanced classes using comp ed dollars as part of that equation. In all of our schools, at least our high schools, both at East and at Denfeld, because of the way the money gets distributed. Second piece under this piece is that an equity approach to comp ed would have schools who get comp ed allocations, they would get comp ed allocations proportional to the number of students who qualify as underprepared or failing to make adequate progress. And all schools have, as we just heard from other speakers, all schools have students that qualify. They said, we sort of speak of it as qualifying for free and or reduced lunch prices. But in reality, I think all schools also qualify as having students who are underprepared or failing to make adequate progress. It's important that we recognize that all schools have a need for comp ed monies. And under realignment, it is our expectation that all schools would continue to get comp ed dollars. This isn't about moving all of the comp ed dollars in any one particular direction. All schools generate comp ed dollars, and all schools should be getting comp ed dollars. So unless the district was to identify an alternative to using the rates of free and or reduced lunch price, then that number would drive allocations. We would like the district to take serious consideration as to whether or not we collectively that we very well may and probably do have better ways than free and reduced lunch count to determine which students should be eligible for comp ed dollars. The statute, as I read it, gives us the capacity to move beyond this class-based model to something that really is about targeting the students who really have that need. The free and or reduced lunch is a poor and even worse than poor model. It suggests that to be low income is to be underperforming and failing to make adequate progress. We can do better. We can be a model for the state in doing better. So that's the framework that we're going to offer. To quote Board Member Sandstead from June 5th, the question is how much and how soon. And as we pondered this, it became clear that that's a difficult question for someone to answer when you're not experiencing the lack of resources. So what would the families of students who generate the comp ed dollars tell us as to how soon we should begin this, and to what extent these funds should be applied to closing the achievement gap instead of general ed needs of uniform class size reduction? If we were to ask the families impacted, the families who generate these funds, whose students are failing to make the adequate progress, to move towards graduation, what would they tell us about how soon is too soon and how much is too much? So we've offered, and you'll see it in those notes, some steps in terms of how might this conversation go. Now, it may not go this way, but this is how the conversation could go. You could discuss 3 how much numbers. What percentage or how much of the comp ed dollars should stay in the buildings that generate them? What percentage or how much is diverted to district-wide uses, such as the curriculum department? And how much or what percentage is diverted to other schools that have less need and less comp ed money generated? When you have those percentages, then you can discuss the how soon question. How soon do we need to get to that target? How soon do we need to get that target? And then finally, what are the incremental steps that we use to get there? What are the incremental steps that we use to get there? Realigning comp ed will reveal, it won't cause, it will reveal general education funding needs that we have in this district. And we need to be ready to respond to those. We have streams to address general education funds, and we need to do this hand in hand so that we are addressing the needs that the community has in front of us. And so we offer that as a framework, as a model for moving forward this evening. And that's the end of our comments. I'll stand here and see if there's anyone that has any clarifications or information questions.
Member Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a question for Kevin right now. I'd like to go back to the comment from Member Welty earlier. I would like to, again, ask this board here to invite the Denfeld Equity Group, their spokespeople, to continue with us during this discussion, because I'd like to see more of this. And reminding the board and the media here that I was one of the 3 people that called this meeting. The reason we called this meeting was to address the concerns that have been raised by the Denfeld Equity Group. That is why we have this meeting. So again, I will ask here to allow Kevin and any other spokesman for their group to stay sitting at the table. And I'm asking for the chair to allow that, and so we can have discussions with them as they come up, like we do in any other, normally when we do with any other discussions that we often have at our board meetings when people are sitting up here.
This is a meeting for information. The public can be in it's a public meeting where they can observe what we do and how we vote. They do not deliberate in the business of the board. So I would say, no, you can ask questions and get clarification.
Okay, well then I will appeal the decision of the chair.
I've made my decision. Member Sandsted.
I'm appealing the decision of the chair. That is the motion before the board. That has to be addressed now.
Member Johnston, can I ask my question of Mr. Square Brown while people contemplate
Sure,
this?
go ahead.
All right. Mr. Square Brown, for me, a lot of this comes down to the next step. And I don't know that your group has gone there yet, but I think I brought this up back in June. What do we do with the money in order to close the achievement gap, in order to enhance the outcomes for these students? How do we, once we have the money where we think we should have it, how do we spend it in order to help kids do better in school? Have you looked at that? Do you have thoughts on that?
So What I'd recognize first is that what we're asking is that we align the money with the need. We have a district full of professionals whose full-time job is to address that question. I also think we have schools full of professionals who work with children, with students, who have some of the needs that we're talking about. I don't believe that we are putting ourselves forward as the experts in how to spend that money, though there may be members within our group who have expertise. And asking people who are at the front lines feels always like a good idea. Looking at best practices always feels like a good idea. I hear that articulated frequently, particularly from the assistant superintendent. She often speaks of best practices. And so I am confident that we have resources if we're willing to access them. When people get behind this notion, that I believe that those resources will be well spent to address the needs. And that's a second conversation. And whether our group has thoughts on that will come out when we get to that part of the conversation. So I don't think that should stop us from this part of the conversation. But I recognize that it isn't just about moving dollars. But we're already making decisions every day about how to best spend the money we have. And we would continue to make those kinds of decisions.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
These microphones are a little limiting in this circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree with you. I also think that that we welcome the ideas especially from folks within your group who are experts, because we do have the statistics that we do these days, and they're not good enough. So my concern is making sure that we have students who are getting the resources they need in the right way to be able to perform better.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit results oriented, but in a way of getting kids diplomas, getting kids to be able to read at appropriate levels. So maybe it's skipping ahead, but I think that that's an important point to keep in mind throughout this discussion.
And if I may respond then. And engaging the community broadly. So I'm aware that the NAACP's Education Committee is very interested in developing mentoring resources and tutoring resources within the community to address the needs of their community. I'm very aware that the Indigenous Commission has identified as one of their 2 priorities increasing graduation rates for Indigenous students in our school district. And so how the school district and the school board engage with the community around identifying what's missing and how do we address that what's missing is really, really important. Do community groups feel welcomed? Do they feel welcomed into the conversation, or are they held at an arm's length? Right? It can be fairly intimidating to stand up here in front of folks with a microphone. You know, I have a fair bit of privilege. I have a fair bit of sort of privileged experience that puts me at a much greater ease in this conversation, right, in this position, than some of our community members do, right? And so it's easier for some of us to do this, to engage, to push, right? So I know that while I believe, and I hope and I believe, that the district wants to bring in a great number of voices, and I think we can do that. And I think this can be a shift in terms of let's start looking again at how we address this. Let's look at this again. People have been pushing it for years, inside and outside the district. And maybe it's, and we dive back in.
Chair Kirby,
Yes.
do we have anybody else signed up? I have the
Yes.
impression. Okay, good. Not to cut you short, I just wanted to make sure there are a lot of people here, and I'm concerned that we're not going to hear from people. I want everybody to speak up and give us your opinion. Don't presume that other folks have been speaking for you. So please share. Thank you.
Going back to Member Johnson, we do have he was correct. We do have do you have a motion to, that you're putting forward to appeal the decision of the chair? Yes?
Yes, I'm appealing the decision of the chair.
Well, I don't hear a second. Yeah.
Second.
It's been second, so it's debatable, and it takes a majority vote to pass. Is there more debate on this, or should we just vote on it?
I do have a question about it.
Yes.
I feel like we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out the process. And my question is, I guess, to folks is, who are the other people that were appointed to have the discussion? Are they signed up as speakers? And are we able to, or would we ask you to identify someone else who might better answer a question? I guess that's my question having to do with this. I'm trying to.
Are you asking me a question?
Yes. I think that, so it's a really tense room right now.
Oh.
And it's because everyone in this room really cares about kids. And everyone's going to come at it in a really different ways. And so I just, we got to breathe. And we have to have these conversations while we're breathing, because when we don't breathe, we don't think.
Yeah.
And so
So
before you say something, actually, because I know there's point of privilege with having been elected too. So as a part of the body, we do have the opportunity, it's our job to debate it and to ask those questions back and forth. Unfortunately, this is better placed within a committee discussion where there are that, but the board members that called it as a special meeting. So we are within some of those constraints. Can we move forward and have this discussion, ensuring that we have feedback from folks in the community that we're getting the right answers? Yes. I don't necessarily think everyone in this room represents all the views that we have across our community. So I think it's important that people have an opportunity to speak tonight, that that they're able to hear it, but also that we just keep breathing. And as we look with regard to the appealing the decision of the chair, my question is for Kevin, and if that's all right with you in the process of this, Chair Kirby, who else was identified to sit with you within this discussion, and did they sign up as speakers, and are we able to have that discussion back and forth?
Yeah. So my understanding of the value of having one of us or more of us available would be, as your discussion proceeds, the ability, much like you do with staff, you say, now we've come to a place where we have a question we'd like to ask so-and-so. That's the value. Mm-hmm. That's the value. I can go back and we can go back and take notes, and then in a month, or actually your next meeting, we can come back in 3 minutes, respond to the things that people will said this month, right? And we can put it in the paper if we want, and we can, in an editorial, and we can put it on our Facebook page, and we could do that. Or we could respond to it in the moment.
I guess, Chair, may I just follow up? I'm trying to understand who those folks are that are who are identified.
So it depends on what the question would be. It depends on what the question would be.
Okay, and we wouldn't know that
until you ask the question.
All right, any discussion on this? Member Oswald. Sorry here.
Before I would like to vote on the motion, I just would like some clarification. If I have a direct question of someone, such as Mr. Square Brown, and he was sitting down, and I asked if I could ask him that question, would he be allowed to come to the microphone?
Sure.
That's what I need. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Member Leffler Kemp, hasn't spoken yet.
I guess my interest right now is to hear from anybody who has signed up to speak before we are asking questions of each speaker. I just think just to kind of hear from the breadth of the people who want to speak, and then that may raise different questions. I personally may ask, but I would like, as Member Sandsted did, to make sure anybody here who's either signed up now or maybe is inspired to speak based on another speaker, we're hearing from people, and it seems like from the agenda that was put out, this is the time for those people who are wanting to sign up to speak before we jump into other questions. So I guess that's how I'd prefer to proceed, but.
Member Welty?
Yeah, I didn't jump in to make this a parliamentary debate, and I think the answer you gave to Member Oswald satisfies me. If we can have the people come up and have whatever dialogue or questions answered that we have, I'm satisfied with how things are progressing, and hopefully they'll continue to do so we can have that community discussion.
Member Harlan, do you have something else?
I
No?
agree with Member
Okay.
Welty.
Member Johnston?
Yeah, the reason I made this motion was not to stop anybody from speaking, but when the speaking is done, we will be having some discussion here. I don't have all the data in front of me that the equity group has presented to the public. They just got back in town here half an hour ago from Washington, D.C. I don't have all my data together, and I would occasionally like to ask them for clarifications. That's what they're not to be part of the discussion, but to clarify when we want. I guess I would again suggest to the chair that after everybody gets done speaking, then that maybe I would suggest that maybe Kevin, as kind of the spokesperson here, could be the one that could answer those questions, and I would be happy with that rather than appointing some other group. I think it is important that we have some ability to clarify some questions which people may have, particularly on what has happened recently on the budgeting, which I think this group is more aware of than we are. So that's why I'm asking the body here to allow that after the speakers, to allow, say, Kevin to be able to answer questions when asked.
I think that the policy allows for asking questions for clarification and information. I see no problem with that. Member Harlett, do you have some?
I'm just trying to understand the motion at hand because it has morphed a little bit with questions having discussions.
Right.
So you did appeal the decision of the chair. My question back to you, Member Johnston. Now that you've heard discussion, are you in agreement? Is this still a motion on the table? And I think that we can move forward.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
I think with the discussion I just heard from Chair Kirby, I'm okay with that, and I think he's saying that we can have some questions. Well, I think he's addressed that and basically said, yeah, we'll do it. So I'm okay with that. I don't think we need to have a vote since he's agreed to, as far as I can see, he's agreed to say, hey, yeah, that's good. So
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Just point of order, it's withdrawn?
Withdrawn, yeah.
Great.
Okay. All right, thank you. Let's go to our next speakers. There are several others here. Mary Owen.
Yeah, good evening. I'd like to thank the school board members who proposed that we have this meeting. I think it's extremely important. And again, thank you. Also like to thank the previous speaker. He was very eloquent, and I won't try to get any justification into my argument. I simply want to talk about this being a justice issue. I am a member of the Duluth Indigenous Commission, and I ask that we form a subcommittee on education because, as you all know, these statistics in this community are ridiculous, and they have not changed in at least 20, if not 40 years. So how can we call this anything but justice, a justice issue? And it's hard for me to remain composed and talk about this. I'm a Native American physician, but I grew up on those other side of the tracks that you're talking about in Denfield, not here, but in my own community. And I know about inequity when I see it. We're not talking about other funds. Put that away for another discussion. We're talking about these funds and how they are inequitably balanced, or imbalanced, I should say. As a Native physician, my job is to recruit Native American students to become physicians or work in healthcare services. When I look around this state, 50%, we don't even have a 50% graduation rate. And this community is not exempt. So tell me that using these funds to make schools small, my kid's from the east side, so I know what those schools are like. Even though there are poor kids over there, they also get some funding for those kids. So I'm not worried about them so much as I'm worried about these kids in Denfield who have been shown over and over and over again to not do as well. So you tell me this is anything but a justice issue. And as far as suggesting for a second that we should lower the standards and expectations and ask our kids in Denfield or any other school what classes they would really like. Would they really like these lower classes other than these high-achieving classes? That's bunk and insulting. So thank you for your time. Thank you for calling this meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Next is John Crum. Sorry if I... Is that correct?
Good enough.
Practice cursive. Sorry.
So I'm not going to be long because I don't think this is too complex, at least not on one level. Although Kevin was speaking and he showed, I think, some of the subtleties and nuances that we are going to have to face when we implement a plan like this, But on one level, I think it's pretty simple. And I appreciate the difficulty you guys face. The upper middle class, and I'm upper middle class, we are louder, we are more powerful, more organized. And you see that here tonight to a certain extent. But as elected officials, your job is to do what is right, not just what people who have more money try and convince you to do. So, I'm a cake eater, live on the east side, who thinks it's time to invite the west side to the party. And from what I can see on these graphs that I've looked at, the west side is paying for part of our cake. So I think it'd be fair. Really, I think it comes down to focusing on the outcome of the kids who are struggling the most. Graduation rates, percentages who go to colleges or other post-secondary education, reading proficiency, science proficiency, math proficiency, happiness. How happy are these kids? If you do this, I think we're going to have a good Duluth and better community. And I hope that you can get this program implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Tuscan.
Superintendent, board members, I did not plan on coming to speak tonight, and part of this conversation about what members of the community-based equity initiative could speak, it's very difficult sometimes to have a conversation when you don't know what the expectations are going to be coming into the meeting. Finding out sometime this afternoon that essentially it was going to be a 3-minute comment period that could be extended and we're not going to really have a dialogue, that's what I found out this afternoon. I'd more than happily sit down at a table and start talking about solutions. But that's not kind of what was conveyed to us, and I get it, we have to play within the rules of policy, so I understand that. But let me get to the point of speaking. First of all, I'm a civics teacher, so I love to see the civic discourse that's going on tonight. Thank you all for coming. That warms my heart as a civics teacher. Second of all, I taught economics for a long time. Scarcity makes for competition. We have a scarcity model in the school district because of our limited resources, and what it does is it pits one group against another. And what happens is we start having conversations about, no, you're not going to take this from my kid, right? And I get that. So let me give you a little bit of context about the reality that I'm dealing with, because this is my lens. I grew up in Morgan Park. I went to Denfeld and graduated from there, went to UMD, and I've been at Denfeld for 22 of my 23 years. I spent one very good year at East High School. What did I come away from that experience knowing is I thought those kids were very similar to Denfeld kids. There were different amounts of different kinds of kids, but they were still kids. Great experience. Glad I was there for a year. I've been back at Denfeld since 2011. So I graduated from the school district. I've worked in the school district for 23 years. I have a house in West Duluth, a half a block from Denfeld. I have kids in our Western schools. I have a graduate that's now at St. Scholastica that wants to be a teacher, thank God. I have a 10th grader at Denfeld, and I have a 5th grader at Stowe. So that's my lens, and I think bias is an important thing to bring up here. That's my bias. When I feel like I've been walking uphill my entire career, or I've been walking uphill holding my kid's hand, you get this kind of a reaction, right? This is a passionate deal. I'm tired of walking uphill. Is this money going to solve it? No. You know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see the city of Duluth go big on a levy next year and solve this for us. Ongoing levy, year after year. Let's talk about the Minnesota Miracle from back in the 70s when we funded public education the way it should be. That's the ultimate solution is. Now we don't have to pit people against each other. These aren't the only issues on the table, right? We're looking at possibly how do we change the secondary schedule. We're looking at technology needs. We're looking at all kinds of needs. This is one issue. What we really need to do is come out as a whole city, east to west, and go big on a levy. And I know there's been some conversation already amongst you guys about how to do that. So what's the reality? The reality is I work at Denfeld High School and I work with great kids. And I'm not going to say that loosely, they're great kids. There are really challenging circumstances in the Western schools. And those circumstances exist in the Eastern schools as well, but in less intensity, less numbers, right? This started with CITS stuff. My own kid was a senior at Denfeld last year and didn't give up just one class, gave up multiple classes to try to make her 6-period day schedule work. So that's where it started for me. It's gotten much bigger than that. It isn't really about Denfeld kids not wanting to take these classes. For me, it's chicken or egg. If you can't get enough sections of something, it's pretty hard for kids to get what they need. It's not about a bunch of kids sitting at Denfeld going, I don't want to take advanced classes. Is there some of that? Absolutely. We need to push harder. But part of it is having the options available for them to take too, so we can invite them in the door. Because right now, if you've got one section and you've got enough singletons, as we call them, you can't schedule it in a 6-period day without a lot of compromises having to be made. East High School does not have that same burden to the same degree because they have many more kids, they have many more sections. It's not that every kid at East High School gets everything they want either. We're not talking about making one compromise, we're talking about multiple compromises sometimes for a kid. My daughter took Spanish 4 online. Does that sound like an optimal, this is rhetorical, does it sound like an optimal idea? It's a foreign language that she took online because she couldn't get it in her schedule, but I digress. Transportation's a barrier. That was mentioned earlier by a different speaker. That is something that can be addressed with money, and it needs to be. Because when a kid has a full plate at home, guess what might be the difference? Walking through the rain or snow, 2 miles to get to school. Another challenge we have to think about with equity is the competitiveness of the Western schools. Proctor, Hermantown, Wrenshall, right? The eastern side of town does not face the same level of competition we do. It's not just people with means that get to pick up and leave. A family across the street from my house, half a block from Denfeld, sends their kids to Proctor. It's competitive out west. And it's not always about the quality of our schools or the perception and reality of our schools. Sometimes it's simply about an available alternative. If you have a one gas station town, you get your gas at that one station. If you have a lot of gas stations, you can get it wherever you want. And that's what we're faced with out west. So some of it's reality, some of it's perception, but that is a competitive environment. There are not just large class sizes out east. I keep hearing this over and over repeated. There are large class sizes at Denfeld. My 3rd hour class has 37 kids in it. 37 kids, which 1 in 4 are special ed. 60 to 70% of them are free and reduced lunch. I'm not talking about 37 kids that are necessarily quote-unquote easy. 37 kids. And that's at Denfeld. Remember, there's not a correlation between the size of your school enrollment and how big your class sizes are. That's not how it works. The general public doesn't understand that. They see East High School at 1,600 and they go, their class sizes have to be bigger. That's not how it works. But we have to do a better job informing the public about that as well. I've used this term before the school board before. There are desperate attempts going on in the Western schools right now to succeed. Desperate. I do it every day. Desperate attempts. Parents, kids, teachers. And I'm going to tell you where that's getting us. The desperation is leading to exhaustion and burnout. You've got master educators that are burning out because it's so desperate. So why are we here? Why have we been talking about equity for a year? Because we're desperate. That's why we need the city to come together on this. Because it's that much of a crisis right now. And I know that because my kids are there and I'm there every single day with them. I only have a couple more points. We don't have enough decision makers in city government and in school governance that have kids in the Western schools. We simply don't. If more people had kids in our schools, they'd be less likely to tolerate what goes on. I can guarantee that because I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. I haven't been tolerating it for a year. But my kids go to school there too. If our current system works, then we need to have people transfer their students into our schools to show us how much it's working. They need to put their money where their mouth is, because I've been putting my money where my mouth is my whole career, and I got a big mouth, right? But my kids have gone to the Western schools because I want them exposed to diversity, because I want them to see what humanity looks like. And my kids have been very successful. But I've always been somebody to put my money where my mouth is. It's time for other people in this community to start doing that. If our schools on the West are so good, then put your kids in our schools. Because after you've had that experience, you might go, yeah, I like this, I maybe don't like that, and you certainly step up to the plate to work on getting some things fixed. More resources don't ensure success, but they do create possibility. You can only wave so many wands without resources. Sometimes it ultimately does come down to that. I do not know what the solution is, but I do believe our current practice cannot continue, and it will take both sides of town to address it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll give people a chance to talk. Is there anyone? Oh, see if there's anybody else there. No? All right. I think if people have questions of the speakers, they should do that now. Go ahead. Member Johnston?
Oh, I don't have questions here. We're just going to start our discussion here.
Do you have any more questions for the
speakers? Not yet. No.
Okay. All right. Well, what do you have to say? Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chair. Being one of the people that called this meeting, I want to tell the board and anybody else why. It was very well spoken why we need this. Our speakers from Denfeld have indicated that they are desperate. I've been hearing that for many years in Western Duluth. And the thing that spurred me on as well was when we seen the budget figures that were distributed by the Denfeld equity people, not by the district, but by the equity people, and they got it. Thank you, incidentally, for giving this information to me. And it was clear to me that the administration was not living up to the spirit of what we passed back in June, which said that we asked the district to commit to a multi-year realignment of compensatory education funds. We as a board left that intentionally somewhat loose because we knew that we had to take some adjustments. We don't want to be penalizing anybody, but we thought that there was going to be some effort to move forward and start addressing that as we, the board, directed the administration. After seeing the budget that was released by the Denfeld equity people, it was clear to me that this was not being addressed by the district. And consequently, we three of us asked to have a special board meeting. One, because the Denfeld equity people asked for that. And two, I didn't think that the administration was dealing with it. And we thought it was so important because Western Duluth is desperate that we called a special meeting. We didn't just ask for an agenda item, which we were afraid we wouldn't get, first of all. More important is that we thought it was critical, that had to be addressed, and that's why we are here. So with that, I will leave that discussion and go on. I'll have certainly other comments as we go here.
Superintendent, maybe you want to respond. It's a good time for that.
Seems like a good place for me to give you an update on where things are. I do want to address, though, that this resolution was in June, and the first part of this resolution accepted the FY18 budget. So the budget for this year was accepted at the same time as a resolution to make changes for the future. So the work that we have been doing, well, actually our work started before the resolution was in place. I can hand these down, just my notes. Last spring we started looking at the allocation process as this discussion was going on, and came up with a new allocation process that was more consistent over time. And that was based on a per student formula. Prior to that, it was based on how many kindergarten sections a school had, which could fluctuate by a section or even two, depending on the number of kindergartners. So we wanted something that would be more predictable in place as we made plans, more long-range plans were developed. So in the past 2 years, Comp Ed revenue overall has gone down over $1.4 million. That's based on a couple of reasons. One, the overall enrollment for the district has come down. The other piece is that the percentage of students who are eligible for free or reduced price lunch services has also decreased, and I gave you a chart there of all of our schools over the past 2 years and their enrollment numbers and the percentages of free and reduced price service students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch services. It's kind of a mouthful. Keep in mind that Comp Ed funds are exponential, so the higher the percentage of students in the school who receive those services, the more money we get per student. So as those percentages come down, the funding comes down at a faster rate. So that's how it gets to 1.4 million less in Comp Ed over the last 2 years. For FY7, from 16 to 17, there was a $934,477 decrease, and from 17 to 18, $482.55 less. And so that is part of it overall, too, as we look at this Comp Ed funding issue. We did make reductions in different areas. The curricular supports, and I do have a correction on here. $250,000 was what we reduced the entire curriculum department by. $96,000 of that was in Comp Ed funding. And then the amount that goes to class size reduction as statute allows was also reduced, $285,000. And then we also made reductions to the discretionary amounts that go out to buildings. So those are the things that we did coming into this school year before the resolution was passed. Since then, we have had more conversations about what this needs to look like. A piece that we're working on right now is a community-based discussion of education equity. That's spurred on by a definition that was accepted by the state recently, developed with partners' voices for racial justice. William House is taking on the facilitation of that. He is here tonight and would be able to tell you more about that if you'd like him to. We're gathering some community advisors to start with, and then we're going to be working with focus groups of specific populations, and then delving into more community-wide conversations about exactly what educational equity means to us. I feel like you're trying to get my attention. No? We're good? Okay. And so William House will be leading that. And as part of that, we hope to develop a set of questions that we'll be able to use as a tool as a district when we're talking about procedures or policies or budgets to make sure that we have an equity focus. Also, in the coming weeks and months, we'll be beginning our budget process. We've actually already started that at our level by starting to make projections and looking at percentages of free and reduced price lunch so that we can have our projected revenues and expenditures, and the board will start that discussion in February, and in March have a draft budget to be considered with a final budget to be accepted in June. And in our annual report, we go over the budget process. It's on page 10. So if people want more information on that, they can look in there. But there will be committee of the whole meetings and regular committee meetings, and it's good to have kids around, isn't it? They're having fun back there. And so be watching for those dates to come out soon. There were also references to a levy referendum, and we have been well aware that the referendum sunsets after FY18, and beginning of last year we started conversations about renewing that referendum and having opportunities to increase that referendum. We've gone to training with board leadership and district leadership to start that process, and in the coming weeks we'll be talking more about that. We'll have community conversations about the priorities. As Mr. Tuscan referred to, there are several considerations for the referendum, and we need to have some public conversation, perhaps some polling, to find out exactly what priorities there are and what financial investment our community has tolerance for. And so we will be diving into that later this spring. There will be a full vision and informational campaign starting, building up until the fall for a vote in November of 18.
Thank you. Member Oswald.
I have many thoughts generated by the discussion so far. Not many of them are very cohesive at this point, as is the nature of sitting up here trying to write and listen at the same time. In regards to what was just described to us by Superintendent Gronseth about our fiscal year 18 budget, what he was describing were cuts to cover a deficit. It's not about equity, it's not about equitable funding, it's about what can we cut because we don't get enough money to do what we need to do or want to do. So I just want to make sure that point is clear, because the history shows that we have many years of cutting and deficits, and we're not able to do what we want to do all the time. So we have to do that scarcity complex, as Mr. Tuscan referred to. But we don't have to approach it that way, even if we experience it that way. I too live in West Duluth, and at 7:30 in the morning, every weekday morning, the Proctor bus stops 2 houses up from my house and picks up a kid, and then goes 2 houses down to the corner and picks up 6 more. I see it every day. The stories of why those 7 or so kids go somewhere else besides Duluth, namely Proctor in this instance, is beyond me. I haven't met all those families or talked to all those kids. A couple of them I know did attend Edison and went to Proctor because they didn't want to experience Duluth. I don't know why. I haven't had that conversation. Others, it's anybody's guess. Those with the most resources don't always leave. It's those whose needs are not being met for whatever reason. If your child is not getting what they need in the educational environment that they're in, there are options out there, believe it or not, such as that Proctor bus that's free and will pick you up just the same, practically at your door, and at your door in one case. So why not? Why not try something different? Well, I'd like to kind of take that approach to this funding. This funding has created our status quo. Our status quo has gotten us an achievement gap that I'm not proud of. It's gotten us graduation rates that are problematic and not anywhere near the expectation our community should have for its children. And so I want to do something different. When compensatory education came to light, compensatory education funding came to light, to know that it was based on free and reduced lunch population students, knowing that just the way our dynamics and our economics in our city is set up, everyone kind of guesses that, there's more poverty in the central, towards the west side of the city, and much less eastward. So one of our speakers, or one of our commenters, commented that some schools that have less free and reduced lunch populations get less free and reduced lunch money. That's very true. And I can imagine that it's hurtful to think that you're getting extra money and now it's going to be taken away, should we choose to do something in that direction. But yet, turn around and be one of those higher free and reduced lunch schools and know that our kids in that school generate this money and they literally have to just watch it walk away. That's the uphill climb, I believe, that Mr. Tuskin's referring to, and the desperation of many of our Western neighborhood schools experience that don't necessarily happen on the other side of town. This isn't about East versus West to me. This is about providing the needs for our kids. We have to look at all of them as a whole while learning about each individual one, and that is tough. It's tough stuff because we already know there isn't enough to go around. When we start talking about singly in a single funding column of compensatory education funding, it is achievement gap money. I believe Kevin is right that we shouldn't be focusing on free and reduced lunch students that generate it necessarily, because it's generated there to help underperforming students. We have to define what underperforming students are. Is that a graduation rate? Is it an achievement gap? Is it those that are bordering on the line of succeeding or not? I think that's a more accurate representation, but again, it comes down to all of those categories are skewed westward in our western neighborhoods and our western schools. So that's not going to change the dynamic of where that money should flow. I certainly do not believe that every ounce of money should be taken from every school and thrown in gigantic lump sums to any one school. It has to be an equitable process. I don't necessarily believe that taking every ounce of money away from the schools that get a little bit extra is a good thing, because there is no way to accommodate that just yet on how to operate without that money. It's like having a car one day and waking up and not having a car the next, and what do? You're just used to always getting in that car to go someplace. So tapering it down or not doing something towards complete elimination is more of what I'd be inclined to do. I'm much more about a compromise. I think that it's very equitable to think that no school should receive less than a certain percentage of their compensatory education funds. I also think it's very equitable that no school should get more than a certain percentage. According to the data that was given to us by the community group, there's a single school that receives over 1,100% more compensatory education dollars than they generate. How is that acceptable to us as a community? They get over $330,000 more. $330,000 more than they generate. And that's coming at the price of the other schools that are hurting more than that school. There's got to be a compromise among here, and it's only to direct our administration to do something better. And I hope we can come to a compromise through our discussion.
Member Harley, you haven't spoken. Do you wish to speak on this?
Thank you, Chair. Superintendent, I appreciated the update on where we're at, and you offer the opportunity for William House to come and speak, and I was just wondering if William would be willing to talk about that process and expound on that. Sorry to call you out, William House. Yes, if I could request the chair. I know that you're providing a lot of leadership in this process, and I think it's important that we invite all of our leaders from the school district to speak to this. And I have a follow-up question when it's done.
Can I sit here so I can use my...
Sure.
Do you want that off?
I'll get this. I'll turn it off. I've got it off. You can.
Thank you, Mr. House.
Bonjour. I said bonjour. No, I'm just kidding. Oh.
Bonjour.
In Ojibwe culture, we greet each other back when we're greeted.
Bonjour.
I couldn't pass up the opportunity to share that unique cultural perspective. So I'll try to give a brief overview of what I've been asked to be a part of and help lead. Conversations around equity, conversations around a definition of equity or a framework of equity in school districts across our state isn't anything new. It isn't something that's new to me in discussions here in multiple areas since returning back here about 4 years or so ago. And there are many districts around our state that have formal agreed upon definitions for equity and then tools to help them apply that definition to the decisions that they make in their district. And so in the last number of months, that's been a topic of discussion, maybe more commonly, and definitely in the last couple months in conversations at cabinet meetings and different things, and even dating back to this past summer, there was a specific conversation around it with a group of administrators about it, the need for an equity framework or an agreed upon definition at least to begin with. I have repeatedly stated in multiple conversations with different individuals when talking about our district doing this is that I had no desire to work a number of hours to develop a definition that we put on our website and then it sits there. But I did say that I would be interested in doing work to develop an equity framework that both works and that we work upon, which is why I choose the idea of an equity framework for our district, because it should work for us and it should be something that we commit to working with and working on consistently and throughout time, because equity does not go away within a short period of time, because we have not arrived at inequities in a short period of time. And so I had a meeting a month or so ago with Superintendent Gronseth. We discussed where we were at with issues of equity and the idea of our district moving towards a more formal adoption of a framework and a definition, and that all in alignment with what Superintendent has already indicated around ESSA and all of that, and the state and their work in the area of equity. And so I did agree to serve as a facilitator of moving us forward in that regard, and that has begun slowly. Some of the I have a number of ideas that I have put together in a document that I would propose for us to get input upon and be able to make decisions upon. So again, that it is a framework that works for us and for all of our students. And some guiding questions to help us develop that. I will be meeting with what I call the informants group. Informants, just to provide information and insight initially, and gather some input on the definition and a tool, what I would call a tool for equity accountability. Accountability in the area and application of equity is vitally important to me. Again, like I said, I have no desire to work on a definition, an agreed upon definition, if we're not actually going to use that definition in a way to create equitable opportunities for all students. And so, along with a definition for our district on equity, I would also recommend that we have a tool for staff, school board members, and administrators to utilize and to help our district be accountable to equity and to considering equity in their decision-making processes. The plan is to begin with an informants group and to move from that group to some focus groups, and then from there, hopefully by during the months of January and February, begin to have some community-wide input sessions and informational sessions, and then hopefully by springtime to present the input from those variety of different groups and sessions to the school board for hopefully an approval, a resolution of commitment by the school board. From there, of course, that's, I won't say the easy part, but that's part of the work. And from there, once it would become adopted by our district, then we would begin the process of implementation. And we would need to develop a quality implementation plan for the use of the equity framework. So I don't know if there's specific questions beyond that. I don't know if that summarizes enough of what you had hoped I could share. That is the general plan, and gathering. I don't take gathering input lightly from stakeholders, and I think it's vitally important to have as many different perspectives around an issue as broad and sometimes as unfortunately confusing as equity can be for us. With the full recognition that our society in America is not based upon any kind of ideas of equity. It is fully based on the idea and an ideal of equality, one which has not been realized for many groups throughout the history of this country. And so that makes it a difficult topic to work in and to make a part of practice, but vitally important, as equity is a pathway towards equality. And so in that process, getting representation from stakeholders from a variety of groups from every possible perspective is not, I would say is not possible. But I am committed to always gathering input from stakeholders that do have diverse perspectives. No one person can speak for an entire group of people. I understand that sometimes people are elected. I understand that sometimes people gain positions in various organizations and such. But no one person can speak for a racial group. No one person can speak for an entire gender. No one person can speak for an entire religious organization or a religious group. But the idea that multiple perspectives are included in any conversation, I think, is vitally important, and that's something that I will strive to do in the work.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question? Maybe we could ask Mr. House questions since he's here.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that do you have 2 questions? Do you have what you need to accomplish this process? As in administrative buy-in and other staff support?
Currently this time, yeah, I believe so, and I think that was something that was really important to me, is that this is something that administration wanted, and not something that the equity guy came in and said, hey, you should do this. And I've also talked with DFT President Bernie Burnham and shared what we intend to do and the work that we're proposing to do, and she's been supportive of that and has agreed to participate in that process.
And my second question, I meant to say thank you, first of all, for coming up and kind of speaking. Also, are there people within the Western Lens group that are represented in some of your community groups? Because I know that this is some of the discussions I've been having. I'm just wondering if they're part of one of a potential focus group or connection for that. And just thank you for your work.
And maybe I didn't clarify it, or maybe I think from maybe a different perspective. I hadn't thought about the geography of representation fully initially at this point. As a driving force for me, and my acceptance to sort of help guide this work is something for the entire district. And so an equity definition that we would agree upon, an equity tool that we would agree upon, would be something that would be applied for administrators and for board members and for staff across our entire district. So I guess I hadn't thought about in the development of the tool that we would be looking at one side of the city versus another. I guess I was thinking about a district-wide tool that would be applicable to all sites and all applications.
Member Johnston.
I don't have any questions for Mr. Hall. I have other comments.
Well, if you don't mind, let's let him answer questions specifically, and then we can come back to you.
All right.
Do you have a question? No? Member Oswald.
Mr. Howes, how are people solicited to become part of your informants group? Or is it going to be selected by you? Is there an application process? How is it being, solicited throughout the community? Can you address those kinds of needs? Because you have an audience here that can spread that word. So,
I have 8 individuals so far for the initial informants group that have all agreed to participate with an idea of representing again, a diverse set of perspectives, recognizing that it's not possible to address all perspectives within our district, but with the intended goal to have multiple perspectives represented there. And those individuals were individuals that I selected.
And is there going to be a different process once you create a larger group, or for more feedback, and how is that? Have you planned that far ahead yet, and how would that work?
Initially planned that ahead, with some identified community groups, identified stakeholders, both within the district and in our communities. From after meeting with the informants group, getting some feedback from there. And I should state the informants group is not so much just feedback on the tool or on the definition, but is also to help guide the process for gathering further input. The idea that I myself could have all the answers for how to engage every single community or as many communities as possible, it just isn't a perspective that I share. So the importance of having individuals to help influence and inform how we go about gathering more information is really important to me. But the plan is to move from that initial meeting with a group of about 8 individuals to a much larger group of maybe 30 or 40 as an initial focus group that would then have representatives from various stakeholder groups throughout our district. And that could be anyone from any number of faith-based organizations to LGBTQ to various parent advisory committees to staff groups and union groups and any number of stakeholders that students. I think the importance of having student input into this is vitally important. It's the reason that we're all here. And so any number of community and other organizations as well as groups I would like to have representation from during the focus group sessions. So that's kind of the initial plan from there. And then from there, moving from focus groups to completely open community input sessions.
And so just one quick clarifying question. Are you talking that your 8-member informant group, is that solely based on diversity, based on race, or is it ability, or is it anything in particular? Is there anything that guided you in choosing those people?
What guided me in my decision for trying to identify various individuals from diverse perspectives is one of the proposed questions that I would propose for our district and in various groups to consider, which is a question that says what groups are impacted by the decision and what is the nature of the impact, being one of the primary questions that a decision maker would ask themselves. And the follow-up to that is groups may include students of color, American Indian students, ethnic background, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender students, students with disabilities, students in poverty, English learners, and gender. And I don't know that is necessarily even a complete list. And I don't know if we could get a complete list, but I would venture that the informants groups and or focus groups might indicate a few other classifications or groups to add to that list. And so that would be the guiding list that I utilized in working towards getting representation as part of the informants group, and also that list then guides community groups that we would hope to have representation from as part of the focus group.
Thank you.
Yes. What's that? Member Johnson?
My point of order, Chair, is that I think that we have went away from our agenda. Our agenda is to look at the resolution about realignment of our funds. While I appreciate the discussion, that is implementing how we're going to do that. I think that's above and beyond what we call as an agenda. And as a consequence, I'm asking that we go back to our agenda.
I think that Kevin Square-Brown brought up the issue of equity in the context of CompEd. So I see what you're saying, but let's finish with the people that want to speak to this, and then we'll let Mr. House go. He's done a yeoman's job. Thank you. Member Welty.
Yes. Of course, equity is already part of Mr. House's portfolio, and taking this on as an issue by itself will be a big task. And I would recommend to you that the informants group that you have of 8 or so people be an initial gathering. It seems to me that for this big topic, you will want to have a more formalized, the board will want to have a more formalized group of people working on this issue. And I guess I would also add that the issue of equity will continue to be an issue long after the comp education spending is settled. But for the time being, where equity is concerned in our district, comp ed spending is where the rubber meets the road, and it's something that we need to have some buy-in for the whole community, east and west, because I do think that we want to keep this an issue of justice, as Dr. Owen and our own Tom Tuskin pointed out. I was very grateful for the words they added earlier on. This is an issue of fairness and scarcity, and there will be a great temptation that I hope we as a community can avoid to avoid trying to protect our own children's interest in thinking of the greater good. I agree with Mr. Tuskin that burnout is a huge factor. I'm aware this is a traditional difficulty that school districts that have jobs that just stretch beyond their abilities to be taken care of suffer from. And I have to say too that getting the limited comp education funds, comp ed funds, directed more where the money is generated from will not solve the burnout problem, but it will help address that problem, and it also will go a long way to make the community realize that we're doing our best to operate under the spirit of the law. This is sort of my last hurrah as a school board member. I've been on for the board for 4 years, most recently, and it's really kind of a shame that we've just gotten to this subject, which I've long wanted to tackle with just about 7 weeks left of my tenure in the job. And I know that the new school board that will take office in January has a huge task, and this is part of it. We've been told that having a more forward-thinking, positive bit of discussions will help the district, and I don't disagree with that at all. I would also like to commend Member-elect Gorham. He's been to an awful lot of our meetings recently, and I wish you well, and I hope this issue does not go away. We pay close attention to it because I think Duluth will expect us to deal with this.
Thank you. Member Kemp, Left Kemp.
Thank you. William, thank you again for taking this task on to help create further discussion across the community. I certainly know my 4 years on the board that the conversations around equity, this isn't a start. They've happened in lots of different ways, as you referred to in your comments. So I appreciate the next steps of the conversation. I had a question around the community meeting piece of it, and I know you're still formulating this, so I'm not expecting specific answers, but having been involved with many community discussions on lots of topics over my 23 years here, I know kind of reaching out and making sure we're doing that piece of this process well is important. So will you be, are you thinking that you'll be involving some of our city commissions, some of our county commissions in helping with making sure as the community meeting piece is happening that we're working as much with other current processes that I know are happening within our city as well as at the county level around equity?
Yes, I would hope to have representation from various city commissions. I'm not sure which ones are county commissions that you specifically referencing, but again, if people have ideas and places that any one individual, myself included, should reach out to gain representation from, I think that's important to share that and be able to take that and include them. But I would hope to have representation from various commissions, citywide and countywide, that would be concerned with our efforts in our district to develop an equity framework as a part of the focus groups, even to help guide how the more broader community input sessions should be done. Those sessions should be engaging, they should be informative, and real legitimate opportunities for input, but also for gaining understanding. And so that's important to me. If we're going to have open community input sessions, we need to design them in a way that are engaging and informative, that lead to more understanding for the broader community.
Thank you. I should say then. Okay. I look forward to having an update on kind of the timeline and the process at one of our upcoming committee meetings. So thank you again.
Superintendent, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that in addition to this process that is being facilitated by William, our full-service community schools, so Myers, Wilkins, Lincoln, and Denfeld right now, that structure also is about collecting public voice. It's about issues of social justice. And when Kevin was talking about that people are there to address the needs and that people need a voice in how to address those needs, then that is a great time for us to be engaging everyone in those schools to talk about what those needs are. I also just wanted to go back to the budget process and say that during the budget process this year, as Member Welty indicated, there are new members coming on the board, and so I think that it would be a really good idea for there to be training on all the funding sources and how they're generated and how they're allocated. Specifically with Comp Ed, there are some schools that have big differences, and there are schools that would have small differences. I know it's not the solution to all of the needs of the school. Specifically with Denfeld, the difference between the allocated and the generated is about $158,000, and we've this year made that equity investment in the budget of $150, and so the difference is about $8,000. I'm not saying that to say that this is a small issue, but I'm also saying that we need to, as Kevin indicated, look at different indicators than how it's generated, but look at the needs of students and the needs of schools and how to allocate that money, because perhaps free and reduced price lunch isn't the measurement we should be using.
Thank you. Unless there are other questions for Mr. House, I would thank him for coming and speaking. Thank you very much. And I'd like to take a 5-minute break if it's okay with everybody, and then come back. So if there's no objection, let's start at 7 o'clock. Okay.
Are we gonna?
What?
I did. And also your battery ran out hours.
Yeah.
But I plugged
Do
it
what
in.
you need to do.
Yeah, I got an HDMI as far as. Yeah. They were like, it's stopped. And I was like, oh, battery. When I went over there. And then I accidentally unplugged it when I restarted. Like, this is new one. Doesn't matter. PBS. Thank goodness for PBS.
Your life will never be the same.
Trying it out, huh?
Yeah.
How does it feel? You're on the record right now.
What's that? She wants to be a cosmetologist and president.
I think it can be done. Yeah.
And Donna, me and Donna were talking. You should come and sit. Nope. Dang it.
So,
Why you asked
with
me
your
then?
cosmetology expertise, what do you think of Donna's hair?
I think it is beautiful. I think she's just beautiful in particular. Altogether. And I like your haircut too.
Thank you. Mine was purple briefly a few months back.
My
even
hair-
at a school.
My hair gets highlighted in the summer, and then it turns like black or brownish in the winter.
Okay, are you ready?
You are too.
It's 7 o'clock. Can we have people sit down and come back? Or come back and sit down? I think I'll ask...
Art's in his seat.
Art's in his seat. Member Leffler Kemp? All right, we'll reconvene this meeting. I'd like to actually start with that second item on the agenda, and perhaps Member Johnston, you were first. You want to speak to that since I lost my agenda. The line item in the budget referencing $150,000 investment. Oh, sorry.
Well, thank you, Chair Kirby. Yes, I do have some comments. First, I'd like to make some corrections. Superintendent indicated that this was not, what we passed in June was not intended for this year's budget. That is completely wrong. It was passed as an amendment to the budget. The intent was by, I believe, the board and certainly by the public that that was supposed to be starting to be implemented. And it's very clear by looking at the budget, it was not implemented. We actually went backwards. So I want to make it very clear that that is Mr. Superintendent Gronseth is incorrect by saying this was not applicable to this year. It most clearly was applicable to this year because it was an amendment to the budget that was passed in June. So we'll want to make that very clear. I'd also like to make some points that there was a petition put out by, I believe it was Parents on East, that supported the Denfeld equity. That was very strong. I don't know how many people were on it, but I know that there was a petition. So people in East Duluth understand that when one school is suffering, all the schools are suffering. So I think that's very clear that these parents do support the Denfeld equity issue. While I appreciate the discussion about how to implement this, the school board has already indicated that our intent is a realignment. We don't have to go about and have a bureaucratic process taking another 2 years to do that bureaucratic alignment. I'd like to read the law, which is Minnesota Statute 126.3.15. Comped funds must be reserved and used to meet the educational needs of pupils who enroll underprepared to learn and whose progress toward meeting state or local content or performance is below the level that is appropriate for learners of their age. That is in the law. We do not have to redefine the law. The law has it very clear. We know what the law says. The achievement gap, Minnesota, the Commissioner of Education has been acknowledges that Minnesota has one of the worst achievement gaps in the country. We know that. We know that Duluth has one of the worst achievement gaps in the state of Minnesota. And we know that Denfeld has one of the worst achievement gaps in Duluth. Those are all issues that we don't have to debate those. We know what those are. That is why the people in Denfeld are here. That is why the people from Denfeld are desperate. We want us to do something about it. It's not good enough to say that, oh gee, we're not the only place that has a problem. Other people do. No. We have an issue. We have a community group that is very concerned about addressing that issue. And we as a board has already directed the administration to realign that process. And we know now, looking at the data, that the administration has not taken even the first step to realign that process. As a result, I'm making a motion. The motion is, be it resolved the district will commit to realigning the compensatory education fund to stay at the school where it was generated by the 2019-2020 fiscal year.
Can you read that again?
Be it resolved that the district will commit to aligning the compensatory education fund to stay at the school where it was generated by the 2019-20 fiscal year. In other words, in 2 years.
One more time.
Sure. Be it resolved that the district will commit to aligning the compensatory education fund to stay at the school where it was generated by the 2019-20 fiscal year.
What, 1920? Member Welty, you seconded that?
Yes, I did.
Member Welty seconded. All right. Is there any discussion on this particular? Member Sandsted.
I'm going to address this. I'm also going to be a little bit broader because my time is limited here, and I apologize for having to leave soon. But the statute that provides for compensatory education specifically talks about students who enroll underprepared, and it specifically talks about early childhood and kindergarten for 4-year-olds. And to say we need the compensatory education funds to stay at the schools that generate them would limit us from what I think is something we should consider, which is putting all of these dollars into early childhood education to open up our district for universal pre-K, make it available across the district. It would mean that the funding that would come based on or is generated in the secondary schools would end up at elementaries or even early childhood centers. We have an issue with space that we would have to address in doing this, but this is a long-term need, and the research shows us that early childhood and having students who are prepared for school is one of the better ways to ensure success in the long term. And it's a long-term investment. But I believe that we need to look at that option as perhaps the best way to invest these dollars to ensure that we are going to get the best outcomes for our students. They're going to be able to graduate and be prepared for the careers in which they want to pursue in the long run. So I'm not going to support this motion. It's not that I don't support realignment of the dollars in the short term, but I do think that we should consider in the long term investing compensatory education funding entirely in early childhood education.
Thank you. Member Oswald. You can find it there, no?
Thank you. I just would like to respond to Member Sandsted's point that early childhood is addressed in the statute. I'm looking at the statute right now, and it's option number 10 out of 12 options. So it's not an all or nothing thing. I could support putting some dollars towards it, but there's 11 other really good options here. I cannot, in good faith, imagine a Denfeld with $557,000 less dollars, let alone they generate $735,000. Or an East with their $121,000 that they generate, or all of these elementaries that have many of those same numbers attached between $100,000 and $500,000. So I think that's something that we can address in the future. I don't think it's relevant right now because we're talking about realignment. And realigning it where it's generated, I'll support that motion, even though I do have my own reservations about taking away. I'm glad there's 2 years attached to that, so we can actually taper it a bit. I'm nervous about the timeline. I might want it a little longer, but I'll support it.
Yes, Superintendent?
I just wanted to point out that this year with the financing bill at the legislature, it was a new requirement that all increases in comp ed funding be applied to extended day programs. And so any future increases, including the increase that we received for this year, or for the coming year rather, need to be invested in extended day programs. And so I just want to be careful that we don't have language that doesn't allow us to follow that. Is that clear?
Member Leffler-Kemp, thank you.
I was, when I put my light on, it was actually to move, it was before Member Johnston's comments in motion. I'm going to put my light on later, but my comment, I guess, for this motion would be, I will not be supporting this motion. And the reason I won't be supporting this motion is I think there's been a lot of good questions and comments that have came from the public tonight. And I feel like I need more information. I want more background based on some of these questions. I've been taking a lot of notes, and I know getting emails from some folks who weren't able to be here tonight with different questions about what was even going to happen tonight. So I'm not going to be supporting your motion. I believe we'll continue to have discussions on this process in our committee meetings, and I look forward to further discussion as we move through a process, but I will not be supporting this motion.
Member Harlow.
I've been thinking, as I'm looking at the signs being held back here, about what you're asking and kind of the root of this. And one of the things that kind of continues to come back to me were the comments of Mr. Squeer Brown and of Ms. Owen about how we identify the students and how what the definition of someone being prepared. And I don't feel that this addresses what the root of what they're talking about. And I guess I would ask Mr. Squeer Brown to expound, if that's possible, Chair, on what you meant by how we change that definition. If that would be possible, because I think the how much, how soon, how much longer is important, but also how are you actually deciding the student? I guess I heard a couple of things in your argument, and so I'm trying to understand a little bit more of what you meant by that.
Sure, if he wants to respond.
So what I was referring to is that using free and or reduced lunch participation, eligibility, I guess is the right word, eligibility, is a poor measure of performance, preparedness. And I think it is another issue. One of the options is we could try to get everything perfect before we start addressing the equity and distribution part of it. I think there are two parts. There's at least two parts that we need to address or could address, and I think that we should address. I heard in your question perhaps a desire to sort of to get it all exactly right before we. So thank you for shaking your head no.
You're misunderstanding. Actually, you've answered the question, and so if I could make a comment.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'll step back.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you saying is that that's not actually the best way by having it go directly to that school, and I don't agree with this motion because I don't think this actually addresses what needs to happen. So and in what I'm hearing from Mr. Squeer Brown, don't feel comfortable in supporting this motion.
Member Welty.
Yes, I've been taken by the two questions that have been referred. They originally came from Member Sandstead that Dr. Jones and Mr. Squeer Brown are holding up. How much, how soon? Or how soon, how much? And judging by the discussion here, The how soon will not begin, doesn't seem very likely to begin with this meeting. And it won't be this budgetary year unless we can cobble together 4 votes for the resolution that's been offered to us. But the resolution offered to us would certainly answer the question if it was passed, because the how soon would be 2019. I would like to address some of the semi-objections that have been raised to it. As to the superintendent's comment that future fund increases in compensatory education have to be used for extended days, I see no particular reason for this. We have to abide by state statute, and obviously, if we have the money follow the children, the extended days would be added to where there are children that raise those funds. Probably wouldn't be super easy to figure that all out and figure out what kind of extended days would be offered, but that would be the kind of a challenge for our staff to wrestle with, and they'll be forced to wrestle with it at some point if the law goes into effect, whether we get any major increases or not. And I would like to hark back to a question that Member Harla asked of Mr. Scrower-Brown early on. Well, where do we spend this extra money? And the answer was a very simple one. We have staff that is expert in handling budgets and education, and they could figure out what would make the most sense as to how to spend the compensatory education dollars on the children who raise them, who are, come to school with difficulties, and I have complete faith that our administration could figure out and year by year work to make this money as effectively used as possible for those children's benefit. Member Sandstead is not able to stay with us, but I have a couple of comments about her objection that we should spend all this money on preschool and early children's work. Theoretically, I think that makes a great deal of sense. If every child could be born into a family and a community in which most of their needs were addressed in the first 7, 8, 9, 10 years of their life, we wouldn't have a problem. But the fact of the matter is, we're not going to have that kind of a community. No city in the United States is going to have that kind of a community anytime soon, especially with the current makeup of our national government. But we do have a small pot of money, compensatory education, that we can spend, and it makes sense to spend it across the board from the preschool years all the way through the high schools. And I frankly have a very hard time regarding her comments as anything other but a way of postponing the decision that would tell us how much and how soon. And the how soon, well, that's going to depend on this school district, this school board tonight, or the few months of budgetary planning to figure out whether they are committed to the 2019-2020 school years as a goal for proper or for fair and equitable spending of these funds. I will be disappointed if this resolution fails. I probably won't be surprised if it does. But I will be one community member who will be watching the future school board and hoping that the future school board does address this soon.
Member Johnston.
Sure, a comment and then a question for Kevin and then another comment. First of all, I must disagree with Member Sandstead. Unfortunately, she's not here. Sorry, but as Member Oswald already said, there's 12 areas that can be addressed by this money. I'm going to read them. Direct instructional services, remedial instructions in reading, art, mathematics to improve the achievement level, additional teachers and teacher aides, lower instructor to learner ratios, a longer school day or week, comprehensive ongoing staff development, instructional materials, digital learning, programs to reduce truancy, encourage completion of high school, bilingual programs, all-day kindergarten, there's a one that did apply to 1 out of the 12. Early education programs, parent training programs, school readiness programs, extended school day and extended school year programs, substantial parental involvement in developing and implementing remedial education. And my motion is very simple. It says that we will address the how much and how soon. How much means that the money will be staying in those schools when, in 2 years. It doesn't say how we're going to do it. We can go and continue lots of bureaucratic work with the community, and we can define that till ad nauseum, and that can be still done, and that would be good. The point is that any of these 12 things and the mention that the superintendent mentioned, it may have to go to a certain function. That was included. I already read that. That's already included. That's already an option that the superintendent can do. The point is that the superintendent has not implemented any of these things for this fiscal year, which is contrary to the direction of the school board. It does not any of the objections that were raised are not valid. This is just telling the superintendent that yes, we will be doing it, and how much and when. It's that simple. And I think I do have, if I could ask a question to Kevin, the chair. It kind of seems like some of the discussion is saying that you don't like the free and reduced lunch. The question to you would be, from your opinion of your group that you're representing, with the verbiage that we have here, would that be a start to implement an improvement that's looked at by the Dental Equity Group? Is the question.
So the question is, would the resolution to realign, which it sounds like it means realign fully by the fiscal year or the school year 2019, I'm sort of understanding that right, would that answer the question of how much and how soon?
Well, would it be a step forward?
It would certainly be a realignment, and it would be a realignment in the very near future, or in the relative near future. So I want to recognize that we are pushing the school board and the district to thoughtfully consider this, but also to take action. And I don't know that I'm in a position to speak for all of the committee, because we haven't been able to meet and respond to that particular resolution. And so I'm going to hold on that. And I also think that this is something for this. You are our elected members, and you have hired a superintendent, and we are asking you to do this. We are asking you to address what many of us, at least, really see as an inequity. The details of how soon and how much, I'm not prepared to define that. If I had been, we would have offered that in our comments.
Thank you. My point is that the objections that I've heard from some of the members here, nobody has any alternative to what my motion is. There is no alternative being put forth by anybody else sitting at the dais. And I've made an attempt to try to push the administration, who clearly has done nothing. In fact, they've went backwards. And my attempt as this board is to clarify what we have done, what we have asked us, and we are still giving the superintendent much leeway, which is in the law. We have 12, and of these 12 options, there's many sub-options in those as well. All I'm doing is asking that we start doing something. I'd like to make a comment that there's been some comments about free and reduced lunch. Is that the best way to do it? I'm not in the position to answer that, neither are any of us, because that has been determined how that money will be allocated by the Minnesota Department of Education. That is a rule. We have no choice in that matter. Free and reduced lunch is the method that is currently used per Minnesota Department of Education. It has nothing to do with us at all. We cannot say, oh, we're not going to do it. We must use free and reduced lunch. I'd like to put a footnote in the law that yes, there is a notwithstanding clause. Seems like all laws always have a notwithstanding the above clause. There is a notwithstanding thing that money can be allocated up to, all the stuff that I read, it can be changed up to 50%. That is an option. And I think the people in West Duluth have said very clear that in this case, it's time that the money stay in West Duluth because of all the things that they've mentioned, that we've mentioned, the lack of equity, the lack of graduation, the lack of achievement gap. And I think this is a very simple thing, and it's not tying the hands of the superintendent. It's just telling him how much and how soon. That's all it's doing. And as well, other than that, we'll make no change on how we're implementing it. It won't change what Mr. Hall was doing with the community. It will be defining how it's implemented, but it will say that we are going to do something finally.
Superintendent?
I just want to refer you to the things that staff and I have been working on this that I already went over, so I won't go over it again. But I did want to point out subdivision 2, subpoint A, that clearly indicates that a school district with special permission can allocate compensatory revenue according to student performance measures if you have a system developed by the school board and it's approved by the state. So it doesn't have to be by free and reduced price lunch.
Member Oswald.
I have a question about ALC money. Right now, it shows that ALC doesn't retain most of its money because ALC students are also spread out into different buildings. And so my question is, when we realign, let me take a step back. How much of the ALC money is in addition to the money, the compensatory education money that Denfeld and East both get? We don't have that number. It's like that. It's like the difference in the compensatory education money from ALC disappears. It shows that they don't get the money they generated as nearly any of what they generate, but yet there's no add column for ALC students in any other school. Do you have any explanation for that?
It's not an easy answer. The same is true of our residential programs. They also generate compensatory education funds and don't receive what at the levels that they generate. Part of the complexity of that is that those students are dual enrolled. And so they are students at Denfeld and East and Lincoln and Ordine East, but they're also students through ALC. So while their course is at Denfeld or East or the other schools, the funding source comes through ALC. So while they're physically at the high school, the funding source comes through ALC to the high school. I know Dr. Carey is very involved with setting up these courses and could probably speak to how that funding works a bit more if you would like him to.
Well, my concern is how much more money does that generate for Denfeld and East? I mean, and I don't know that you necessarily have the amounts, or if there are necessarily amounts that can be assigned for that. I think what I'm asking for is more detailed data based on students, because I know personally both my kids have been in courses that are ALC assigned, sorry, private data released. Not in trouble. Anyway, yes, my data to share, I guess. I understand what you're trying to describe, but I also want to value that those kids that are receiving those special services from ALC still reside within the Denfeld population, and I'd like to know how much more money they contribute to their compensatory education dollars on top of what it is, because with your rationalization with the budget that we made an additional $150,000 investment, so they're near what they need for compensatory education. That doesn't include the student need from the students that are so far behind they need help from ALC services.
We would need some time to work through that because another layer of that complexity is that while students, because they're dual enrolled, when they're in ALC has a much higher percentage of students who receive free and reduced price lunch services than our traditional high schools do. So while they're in that section, they are generating a higher amount than they are the rest of their day. And so that would just take some math to figure all of that out.
Sure. I think it's a vital part of the conversation because right now it just looks like that money disappears. And with that, I just wanted to reiterate that I did speak with Principal Sconiers during the break and asked her about that $150,000 investment that we did make. And the concern is how is that $150,000 going to be replaced in continual budgets? Because the things that they are buying with that $150,000 include the Denfeld Full Service Community School Coordinator and the bar coordinator. So they're concerned about longevity funding, and does that $150,000 continue in next proposed budgets or not? And if not, where's that money going to come from? Is that going to be extra money pulled from comp ed money? Is that, are you going to leave that up to the principal to decide how to fund it and where to fund it? Those are larger questions than I think we can answer tonight, but those definitely are questions in this puzzle because those things are vital sources of support for our kids that would not exist without funding. And so do we give Denfeld their entire comp ed allocation and that just goes to fund what we already invested? Then it's a net gain. There's no net loss or gain, I guess I should say. So how do you propose that work in future budgets, I guess is my question.
Do I respond now?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Well, I've gone through, you're familiar with the budget process and how we would go about that. And right now, that $150,000 is an investment that we make from general fund. It wouldn't be my intent to remove that. I think that the investments in bar and full service community schools are very important ways that we're addressing needs of students at those schools. If we went to a model of allocating as generated, all comp ed, and we did that before we didn't identify another source to replace that, we would be working very hard to find monies to invest in class size across the district. And so that 150 in general ed funding would probably be considered for to go to support class size across the district. As I mentioned before, we are planning for a referendum. That referendum would be the first year that referendum would be in place is 1920. And so the referendum would need to take that into consideration in that planning. But without having a revenue source to replace that, we would be hard pressed to make investments outside of class size until we were able to find those revenues.
Member Leffler Kemp.
Yeah, I just wanted to just comment. There were comments kind of assuming why people were supporting or not supporting this motion. And again, I just want to make it clear, I'm not supporting this resolution. It does not mean I do not support action of some kind. But when I was reelected, what I heard a lot from the public was that they appreciated that I took time to make thoughtful decisions, that I took time to make sure questions were answered. I took time to reach out to the broader community on issues that had a district-wide impact. And so I guess I just wanted to state that the community and speakers brought up a lot of good information, a lot of good questions, and I look forward to furthering this discussion as we move forward with administration on realigning. And I guess I would like to also move on with this agenda that we have. There's another item, and so I call the question on this motion.
Okay. Do we have a second? I can't remember. Right. Well, the question has been called. We should have a show of hands, I think, so we know. The question is, would you read it again for us, please? So we're clear.
Art's motion, seconded by Member Welty, was be it resolved that the district will commit to aligning the compensatory education funding to stay at the school where generated by the 2019. No, I'm reading the question that's being called.
Don't you have to vote on calling the question?
Oh, you have to vote on calling the question? We do.
I lost my little thing. All right.
It's yes or no on calling the question.
All right. All in favor of calling the question, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
It failed. It needs does not have a majority. So, right. Member Johnston.
I'd like to thank the superintendent for bringing up subdivision 2, subparagraph A. And he makes a good point, and it says a district may allocate its compensatory revenue to schools where the children have generated the revenue or served. Above, unless the school has received permission under Law 2005 to allocate compensatory revenue according to student performance measures developed by the school board. And then I appreciate bringing that up. The problem is that has never been brought up to the school board. We've never even brought it up to us. Again, I don't read every law. That certainly would have been a good thing to do. Would still be a good thing to do. My motion would not impact that in the least. Again, it's revenue according to student performance. If we use student performance as a metric on how to allocate the compensatory education money, I don't think we're going to have much difference. In fact, it may even be more going to the Western schools. For example, reading, Denfeld 58% proficiency, East 77%. Science, Denfeld 46%, East 70%. Math, 29% in Denfeld, East 53%. Then graduation rates, 76% in Denfeld, East 94%. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that would be a nice thing to do, but that is no reason whatsoever to vote against this motion or for the administration to oppose it, because we passed this. The verbiage is we will align the compensatory education funds to say the schools were generated. If the board decides to generate the money is generated by the needs of the schools, we're going to be in the same position we are now. There would be no change whatsoever. I would like to again remind why I think one of the reasons is why the community group is concerned about the alignment did not happen this year, which it should have, is that Denfeld, the comp ed money was reduced by $130,000, but yet in the East was only reduced by $40,000. So again, we have before us, this deliberative body, a solution to make this more equitable. And all I'm asking the board is that we move forward with that and not take any more time. The people that say that they are not opposed to this, well, they are opposed to it. The people that are going to be voting against this are opposing moving forward to getting the comp ed money equitably distributed the way I believe the law says, and more important, the way the school board has directed the administration to do, which they up to now have failed to do. So I'm again asking this board to vote affirmative on this motion.
Thank you. I am going to be voting against it. I think that at the time we passed the original resolution, there was no strict time put on it, precisely because we couldn't agree then, and there were too many unknowns, and I think there are as many or more unknowns that have been elucidated by people tonight. The budget is the elephant in the room. It's a big elephant, and it's an unknown, as we've found out just recently when we were getting bond ratings. I think that we are committed, and to say that, at least personally, that I'm not, because I will vote against this, but I've voted for the other one is not the case. We need wider community involvement. The Denfeld Equity Group is a community group, but the community in Duluth is a lot larger than that, and I think we need further and more input from other people, so I will be voting against this. You can have one last word. Yes.
Sure, I would like to emphasize, too, that even though I am the West Duluth representative, there's also a large impact on Myers-Wilkins as well, which is not a West school, it's an East school. So people that are in East Duluth, I would hope would also support this. And of course, we know, too, that there has been school board members lobbying Congdon people to come here and opposing this. And I don't think that's appropriate.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, the motion has been made and seconded. That, read this once more for us, please. Chair Hurley.
Resolved that the district will commit to aligning the compensatory education funding to stay at the school where generated by the 1920 school year.
2019, not 1920.
Oh, by 2019-2020. Okay.
Fiscal year. All right. All in favor of this motion say aye. Aye. Member Welty, Oswald, and Johnson voting aye. Those nay, say nay. Nay. No. So member Loeffler, Kemp, Kirby, and Harlech vote nay, and it fails. It does not have a majority. All right. I think that we have...
Member Oswald.
Oh, Member Oswald. I'm sorry.
Thank you. There's one thing that I've been meaning to address in the reference data chart that was sent to all board members regarding the allocated and generated expenses as a percent. It indicates that 2 of our schools actually fall below the 50% threshold, and I would appreciate that those numbers are double checked and remedied if they are. And those 2 schools would be Lower MacArthur and Myers-Wilkins. Accordingly, both get about 47% instead of the state allocated 50%.
You want that noted?
I'm pretty sure I followed what you said. The 50% is regarding the amount at each level, not any particular school. So the 50% is of district compensatory funding.
Member Leffler Kemp.
Just a process question. Are we now moving on to 5 now, or where are we on the agenda here? I know we kind of
We've done action. I'd say unless people have other things, I'll look for someone to adjourn.
Okay.
Member Johnston.
Sure, just to follow up to Member Oswald, reading the notwithstanding paragraph that all laws in Minnesota seem to have, and I'll read that to you. District may allocate up to 50% of the amount of compensatory revenue that the school district receives to school sites according to a plan adopted by the school board. The 50% is in there. That's where that number came from. How you interpret it, I'm not sure. But reading this, it says according to a plan adopted by the school board. The school board has not adopted a plan to allocate 50% or any other money for that amount of that. So we are violating the law by not having a plan adopted by the school board. And sorry that I did not read this closer, but having this school board, having turned this down, we are violating the law because we do not have a plan adopted by the school board that would shift up to 50% elsewhere. So we are violating the law again.
Do we have this permission?
It's how he's interpreting it.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Clarification.
Yeah. Here you go.
The compensatory budget is part of the budget. When you accepted the budget, you had that information in front of you, the per student expenditures at each school, which included the general ed, comp ed, vocational, Title I, integration. And so that was accepted by the board as your budget.
Member Johnson, do you have
That's a bunch of bunk.
let me be civil, please.
That is incorrect. When we put out that we were not told that we were not told that the law says that we must approve a plan of up to 50%. We were given a blank thing. We made a motion to change it. That motion passed unanimously. What we should have done is, according to this, it may allocate up to 50% to other purposes, only according to a plan adopted by the school board, and we did not adopt that. By passing a budget, we did not adopt that. We were remiss at the time in not putting a timeline and the amount on that, and this was a chance to remedy that. And again, I would ask one of the 3 people that voted for this, only way we can comply with the law is to reconsider what we just passed, and to reconsider at this current meeting, you must have somebody voting for that. If we refuse to do this, if this board refuses to do that, we are violating the law.
Member Oswald.
I don't recall having the budget sheet that Superintendent Gronseth referenced with us when we adopted the budget. We were given the individual school budget one-pager sheet in January, and then again we've received it by email this month. So we did not have it at budget time, so we didn't have the exact list of how much compensatory education funds were going to each building or anything else that he just referenced. I don't want to be in violation of the law. So I guess I'm asking for guidance from anyone that how we can be in compliance. Do we need another motion? Do we need to reconsider? Take your pick.
I'm not sure that we are not in compliant. I'm obviously not a lawyer, but I think we would need some people smarter than us to tell us that. All right. Seeing no other lights, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
It's been moved. In a second? Second. Moved and seconded to adjourn. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes 4 with 2 abstentions.